There are pianists, and there's Krystian Zimerman. This week's programme is devoted to an interview with this fascinating, enigmatic musician, the Polish pianist who, for many, is simply as good as it gets, or indeed has ever got, in the history of piano playing. Enigmatic isn't a cliché with Zimerman either. He can't remember the last time he agreed to give a radio interview. His last solo recording of the Debussy Preludes was made 18 years ago, and he gives few public performances. So his views on music and music making are more the stuff of speculation than public record. So where does his reputation come from? Well, there are some biographical facts that give a clue. He was the youngest ever winner of the Chopin competition in 1975, still in his teens, and in the years after made concerto recordings with Giulini and Bernstein and solo discs, above all, of Chopin that wowed the musical world. But Zimerman's increasing fascination with the recording process, with the microscopic detail of technologies, of acoustics and the physics of piano manufacture, meant that his record releases slowed down drastically. Those he did allow to be published, like the Liszt B-minor Sonata, the concerto that Witold Lutosławski wrote for him, those Debussy Preludes, or the Chopin concertos with the Polish Festival Orchestra, an ensemble founded by Zimerman especially for those two pieces, all of them became instant classics. The sheer beauty and clarity of sound that Zimerman produces from his instrument, the conviction and imagination of his interpretations, as well as his technical flawlessness, have entranced listeners all over the world. He's touring Britain at the end of this month to play a programme that includes a work he's surprisingly never played in public before, Beethoven's Final Sonata in C minor, Opus 111. I met him in Switzerland, in Basel, where he's lived with his family since the mid-1980s and where he used to teach at the Academy of Music. I began by taking him back to his childhood in Poland and the beginning of his obsession with the workings of the piano. At the height of the communist regime, playing the instrument wasn't just an aesthetic job, but a mechanical one too, and it even involved a bit of carpentry.
I was educated in a time where there were no spare parts, where we lived behind the Iron Curtain and, getting a set of hammers or getting spare parts for a Steinway piano was completely out of the question. It was simply too expensive. And the state couldn't afford to pay this money, so we had to do this by ourselves. If something got broken, you just took a saw, you took a piece of wood and started to, mimic this piece. Try to repair it.
So this is what you were doing as a teenager?
That's what I was doing as a teenager, and I was earning my extra money by winding strings for the pianos and so on, doing this kind of jobs. And earlier or later, I really realized that this is fantastic experience for me because I understand the piano from inside. I understand it's almost like a human being for me, because I know where it's sick, when I listen to an instrument. And this is, I think, a basic necessity we have to teach, especially pianists. The violinists don't have the problem. They play the same fiddle Paganini played. The acoustic changed, yes. The addressee changed. That is still enough of a problem, but with the piano it's much more complicated.
It means also that you have very specific relationships with different pianos, that you choose individual instruments for the different repertoires you're playing with. So you have one piano you might use for Ravel, another piano you might use for Brahms, another piano for Beethoven. That sounds kind of wildly impractical in a way, but it's essential for you.
It's very practical. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. Beethoven really had a different piano at home. And on top of that, he had a very special hearing. Many people think he was deaf. No, he had a very special hearing, He had these wooden sticks which he would lean against the soundboard and would bite them from the other end. And because of this transmission, so-called bone transmission, the sound was going directly into the brain or meeting the ears, which were ill in his particular case. And this man heard probably completely different things than we heard today. I was speaking to a person who is actually designing hearing aids, and I said, look, tell me one thing. Beethoven doesn't hear high frequencies with this kind of illness. How come that all his last sonatas are higher and higher on the keyboard? That in the Ninth Symphony, the sopranos are screaming so high that, they can't get it anymore. why is it? I mean, this man obviously didn't hear these frequencies. And we both agreed that the bone transmission is responsible for transmitting even higher frequencies than the ears can.
And so you're saying then that this way of hearing, in other words, the mechanics of, in Beethoven's case, of how he heard and how he related to his instruments through this, putting a stick to the sounding board, had a direct effect on the way he wrote his music, and therefore ought to have an effect on how you as an interpreter, as a pianist, relate to the music.
And when you use many pianos, you suddenly realize that they are instruments you come across, you don't have to cheat anymore. You can really play it the way it's written in the music. And then you know you are on a good track, that this is probably what Beethoven heard.
Because you're trying it out with different instruments?
Yes. I have different keyboards, simply. I have 6 pianos, but they also have different keyboards, and they build a little bit different.
So you take the 88 keys off?
I slide it out, I put a different one, and then the trouble starts. Because nothing works at the first moment.
How does that work in terms of, I suppose I can see how for the recording projects that you're maybe most famous for, let's say the Debussy Preludes or...
Wait a second. I did my last record 18 years ago. My last solo recording was from 1990.
Is that true?
And in these last 18 years I was trying to record, but I'm realizing more and more that music is not an audio experience.
It's not an oral experience.
It's not an audio experience. It's something more than audio. And the digital technique actually showed me this.
The digital technique of recording, you mean? Yeah.
It so clearly transmits the sounds that you can't hear the music anymore.
Okay.
This is a different subject.
I think we need to explain that, because that might seem paradoxical to listeners, as it does a wee bit to me, that you're saying music is more than an oral experience, and that digital recording, in giving you so much information, is not giving you the music.
From the very beginning of the digital technique, I had a problem in the studio, because I had too many informations concerning the sound, and music is not sound. We are using the sound for creating music, but music is actually more organizing people's emotions in time. And it's more the time flow, it's more the story you're telling using the sound. Going by more and more perfect sound, you're not necessarily achieving a better story or are able better to tell the story, because there will be a lot of factors which will start to disturb the listener. The perfection of sound, which is kind of overexposing itself. And on top of this, I would say there is a very interesting function of the distortion in all this. We always have some kind of distortion. In a concert hall, there's a tremendous distortion. There is never a total silence in a concert hall. So there's a kind of basic hum, basic level of distortion, which is something we can lean at, we can play with. And if you look at old recordings, for example, I had a beautiful recording of Preludes, Chopin Preludes by Courtauld.
Alfred Courtauld.
The man is really playing with these distortions. He's really diving under it. He sometimes doesn't play half of the notes. And that I only realized after someone gave me a cleaned version of this recording. It's awful, absolutely awful. And this man gave it with a great satisfaction, said, look how he's cheating in the left hand. He doesn't play most of the notes. I said, well, this is terrible, because for this media he recorded it for, it didn't matter. So this man had an intelligence of playing that what was important and hitting exactly that region in which he could transmit his art to the listener, not bothering about all the other things which were unimportant. And now cleaning this recording is like you would go to the Louvre and undress the Mona Lisa and realize she doesn't have very clean pants this day. This is unfair, because the picture is about her smile and not about her underwear. And that's exactly what digital technique did to us.
Okay, but if you haven't made a solo disc since 1990, you have made concerto recordings in the last 18 years. And most recently, the Brahms' first piano concerto with Simon Rattle and the Berlin Philharmonic. Are you still frustrated with the recording process?
Orchestra is a little bit easier for me. At first, I have a listener. There's 60 people sitting next to me. And the adrenaline starts to work between us. It's very important. And they also make a lot of noise, so it's the basic silence is not that dead than it is while you're recording yourself. So it's slightly easier, and that's why most of my recordings are concertos. And actually, most of these concerto recordings are actually live.
But you're happy with them? I mean, you're happy with these recordings?
I'm not happy with recordings at all. And I don't advise anybody to buy my records. I always listen to them once, and after I had to approve them, and I always approved them under stress and under the pressure of the company.
But there's a paradox here, because I know that you record everything you do, all your concerts. You have a library of all of your concerts. So you're saying...
I'm trying to get friend of this monster, which is on the other side of the microphone.
But is the other monster yourself? Does it pain you to listen to yourself, that you listen and you're very critical of what you hear and you think, oh, I should have done it differently, or, you know, this isn't really my version of this piece, I need to do it again?
You know, on various stages of my musical consciousness, I would put it this way, I listen to different things. And again, in the last 10 years, I'm listening to the flow of music. And what I like mostly to listen, I like to listen in a car. I got rid of all this fantastic equipment I had before. I have really small machines which you can put in the pocket today, and if I really want to hear music, I put it into my car and I drive around the house. Because then my conscious part of the brain is occupied with the road, and the music goes right there where it should go. And I was always curious, why is it this way? Why do I hear so clearly what's wrong in a record when I'm in a car? And you know, the basic noise of the car is covering all the details. So I stop listening to details. My mind stops being distracted by the details, and I listen to that what in the music is the most important, telling the story.
If you offer me a lift, I'm not sure how I'd feel, because it sounds like you'd be concentrated on the music rather than the driving.
Well, let's put it this way. I'm trying to do it late at night and looking for empty roads in case the recording is really bad.
And are you listening mostly to yourself?
No, to records I never listened after I approved the record. And so I don't know what you're talking about when you say, you know, the old record of this or that. It's difficult for me to say. But yes, I'm listening to concerts occasionally, especially when they are bad. Then I'm curious to listen.
Your own concerts,
what's wrong? Yeah.
Mm. And what relationship do you have with yourself when you're listening to these concerts? I mean, can you give me an example of a concert you've listened to recently?
It's like, you know, I know more about this guy than anybody else. So it's a very special relationship. It's like listening to your own voice or looking at the mirror at your own face. The same is with music. It's very difficult to listen to oneself so that you can hear yourself clearly. You have always an excuse because you know why you did this way. And you will always go in the other direction, that you hear more details than the other person. Maybe these details don't matter at all.
It's a sort of paradox in a way that you have allowed so few recordings, proportionally, if you like, to be authorized by you and released, and yet you record every concert you do.
No, but I don't record it to sell it. You know, if you allow a record in the market, you should be convinced that the record is something enriching the market, that it can give something to the people, something nobody else gave before you. If it's a mediocre record and you're just releasing it because you recorded it, I think this motivation is wrong.
Because it's also true to say that for the people who haven't had the chance to see you live, they may not know that the repertoire you play in concert is much bigger, clearly, than your discography, and also then presumably that means that the music that you play at home and that you're listening to and working on is also much bigger than the repertoire you play in concert.
Is maybe 1% of what I work on at home.
1%?
Yeah. I work every night on pieces which I'll never play in my life. I worked yesterday on Florent Schmidt. I worked the night before on Rossini piano pieces, and I listened the night before to symphonies of Pari and Rubra, and it's something I'll never conduct. I'm curious. I'm simply curious because it's so many interesting things. And after I analyzed this Rossini, I thought before Rossini died in 48, after he wrote the last opera, he must have died. And then I realized he lived another 40 years, didn't write one single opera, and wrote about, 1,300 piano pieces. And looking at them, I realized that I know where Erik Satie is coming from, all these funny titles later. And he had a tremendous influence over the French music of Alcan, of Satie and others.
Mm-hmm. How then do you make the decision, the pieces you're working on? You work mostly at night, is that right?
Yes.
So you literally play through the night at home?
Oh, decision it's difficult to say.
So how do you make a decision then to present something in concert?
Difficult to say. How do you make a decision what you eat in a restaurant? I mean, do you know this 1 year in advance?
No, but I suppose I eat what I want to, as opposed to eating 1% of what I want to. Whereas, from what you're saying, if you present to the public 1% of what you can play and do play at home, that's a different thing.
I have to have a motivation that I want to play this piece at this moment. And I need the audience for this, because I never play for myself. I work at home in a studio, and then for the first time I hear this piece, from the beginning till the end, actually in a concert hall. And it's a tremendous risk. And it's wrong. I absolutely don't advise it to any student to do this kind of thing. But I couldn't do it at home. It's like, talking to the mirror, I love you, and looking what are the lips doing at this moment. You need the addressee, you need the person, you need to have the feeling, and then the words will come by itself, and maybe it will sound completely different than what you meant before. And that's what the exciting thing of a concert is. The interpretation is made actually together with the people, with the audience. I have a very precise ideas of what I want to do. I'm prepared, of course, technically. I have at least 3 sets of fingerings, which I change according to the acoustic and to the power I use in various concert halls.
3 ways of fingering each piece that you
sometimes more. So I am prepared for a concert, but the final thing, that what art is made of, actually happens in a concert hall.
So in a sense, you can't know a piece of music, however much you've studied, say, the Rossini's piano music at home.
Everything about the composer and so on.
Yeah, however much you know about those things and however much you know the notes.
Some pieces I carry around for years. A lot of pieces, the recent pieces I play, I worked for 10, sometimes more years. Now I'm playing a new piece just this season, which I worked on for almost 25 years. It doesn't mean every day I was practicing this piece, no. I sort of worked one day and then left it and then worked again half a year later and so on. And some new ideas were growing and eventually I realized, okay, I have the piece now, I want to try it. I want to do it.
Which piece is that?
I can't tell you.
Are you going to be playing it in May?
I'm too ashamed to tell you.
Are you going to be playing it in May when you come to?
Probably, yeah.
Okay, well that's something to listen out for because you won't announce the program until later. It's obviously no.
I would really like to play the piece I want to play that evening, and not to announce the program a year in advance and then come to the concert. Oh my God! Now I have to play this piece.
But you already leave it much later than many other people to announce your programs, and people will be aware of that. For example,
or the other way around. People do it much earlier than I do it.
There's another paradox about all this, all the preparation that you go into, so that in a sense you know what you're going to do when you play to an audience. You know what fingering you're going to use. If you're in a big hall, you use one of the fingerings you set up.
I don't know.
You don't?
No.
Because I guess what I mean is, what's the difference between preparing so minutely your interpretations and the spontaneity of what can happen in that communication? I mean,
you're preparing 2 different things. I mean, you're preparing a craftsmanship, you're preparing all the versions of what could happen. And it's like, you're going to say to someone this evening, I love you, so you wash your teeth, and you're prepared for this. But you not necessarily go to the mirror and practice this phrase.
So in other words, you can't prepare for how you're going to feel when you're playing, let's say, the Beethoven Opus 110 sonata. You can't prepare for how it's going to feel, however many times you've played it before, however many different audiences you've played it to.
No idea how close you were now.
Maybe it's the last. Oh, okay. So let's say, for example, that the Beethoven Op 111.
Oh my God!
You have no idea how that's going to feel until you're in the moment of performance. So
I'm scared of this piece for 25 years.
Why in particular?
Because I have such a tremendous respect to this. And yet I have a feeling that my interpretation will go different. And it might be that people who are used to certain recordings will rebel. And, you know, we have sometimes very strong people, I don't want to use the word critics, but people who judge us who don't study these pieces. They study the recordings. And from studying the recordings, they think they know the piece. But studying the music and actually being engaged in the process of creating it is a completely different thing. And this partly maybe accounts for the fact of the globalization of styles today, of this so-called, I call it the Middle Atlantic way of playing, where everything sounds the same. I mean, 100 years ago, you could probably hear the difference between an American and a French and a German orchestra. Today, if you listen to a record, it's very, very difficult. Everything sounds the same. And this is the disadvantage of the globalization. Because we also have advantages. The beginning of this century was fascinating for me, absolutely fascinating what is happening, you know, in the beginning of 1900. How many different people write in a completely different way. They can already profit from each other, but the power of the other culture doesn't squeeze the first one yet. So we have a Russian way of writing, and still between the Russian is a tremendous diversity. It's complete different Prokofiev than Rachmaninoff than Scriabin, not to mention all the other ones. But then we have the French school, it is totally different. Then we have Bartók, then we have Stravinsky, then we have German school, then we have Italians, then we have Americans, then we have Amy Beach in America. And it's phenomenal how far it can get. I'm putting in my next program 2 pieces of 2 composers, can't be more far than that. And yet when you look at the years of composing the pieces, it's something like 4 years difference. It's phenomenal.
You can't tell me, you're going to tell me what
No, it's not important.
Yeah.
I'm just giving you an example now that it's something from completely different cultures, and yet from the same time, try to find it today.
So your concern is then that not just that schools of composition, but the schools of playing have become homogenized and basically sound the same. I mean, that's one of the reasons, I guess, in 1999 when you presented the Polish Festival Orchestra and your recordings and performances of the Chopin piano concertos, you had to find your own orchestra in a way, I guess, to create the right conditions for orchestral music making that you can't find normally.
You know, I was unhappy with every performance of these concertos, because all these tutti were treated in such a way, and they all sounded the same. And I realized, well, for all my life, I want to hear it different. Chopin was fascinated with opera at this age, and the opera was very, very good at this time in Warsaw. You know, the director of the opera would bring every first performances of all the 7 most important Italian opera writers. They first performed in Italy, and then they first performed in Warsaw, sometimes few weeks later. And so Chopin knew, for example, 7 Rossini operas at this time when he wrote the concertos. And yet nobody ever tried to do it in an operatic way. It didn't really satisfy my feelings about it.
But if you're kind of thinking that nobody played the orchestral tuttis of the Chopin concertos in the right way, I mean, you'd heard them, you'd worked with them, with Giulini, with Karajan.
You know, we used to do it in Poland in a kind of military way, which I didn't like. And then the German asked me, we have all these fantastic conductors, Karajan, Bernstein, Giulini, Ozawa, and so on. With whom do you want to do it? And I said, I would like to do it with the guy who's the closest to the opera. And they said, okay, it's Giulini. And they asked Giulini, Giulini said yes. And then this humble man took all the recordings from Poland and tried to do it the Polish way. I mean, Polish, now, it wasn't really Polish. I mean, that's what we imagined it was Polish. But I don't think Chopin would have liked it.
in that experience of touring with the Polish Festival Orchestra, this hand-picked orchestra playing these two pieces 30 times, I think at least, in quite a concentrated burst that year, did you achieve the ideal conditions for orchestral music making that you would like? Was it in a way a kind of model for how the rest of the world
concert was such a great experience that after this I stopped playing with orchestras altogether, because I couldn't stand this one rehearsal, putting together the piece and playing. And I thought, why should I do it? It was a great experience. At first we worked for quite a long time, and we could work on things no other orchestra can work. I mean, starting from bowings to the way the strings sound. In the middle of the work, I broke off the rehearsals. I went back to Switzerland. I brought 22 instruments back, from Guarneri di Gesù to the most wonderful Italian fiddles, because I was dissatisfied with the sound of the orchestra. And I realized there is a limit what I can get out under these circumstances, so I need better instruments. So I brought the instruments. I literally smuggled them into Poland. And then we rehearsed, and these people, you know, I was looking for crazy people who want to work this way. And will, after the last concert, still go and make a rehearsal. And I have to tell you, after one of the last concerts, before Carnegie Hall performance, the orchestra asked me for a rehearsal, and we rehearsed 10 hours. And this is
after having played it dozens of times all over the world.
Yeah. It was wonderful to be together, and every rehearsal was already an experience. Whereby, when I play with normal orchestras, I have a feeling they hate rehearsals. They hate the music so much that they want to be as shortly as possible rehearsed, and the moment it's together, that's all they want to do.
You have worked with orchestras recently?
No, I haven't played with an orchestra since 2003.
2003, which was the Brahms' first piano concerto.
And before I played once in 2002, so I played maybe 5 orchestra concerts since 1999.
In almost a decade then?
Yeah.
Can you imagine a situation in which you go back to it?
You know, I'm not booking orchestras for the moment. Actually, no, it's not true. I decided for an orchestra project, and I hope the orchestras will collaborate, and I'm really looking forward to it, because it's a project of Lutosławski Piano Concerto, which...
piece he wrote for you 20 years ago.
Well, he wrote it for every pianist, but he somehow gave me this score as a dedication, and I feel responsible for this music. And I love this piece. So we played it together in many places in Europe, and then in the middle of all this touring, he died, leaving me with this piece and with the curiosity, because he said, you know, I'm so curious to see what will come out of this piece in 20 years. I only wrote it, you know, but I want to see how it will develop. And look how time runs quickly. This year, 2008, is 20 years. We first performed it on the 31st of August, 1988. And I sort of felt, you know, it's time to do all the remaining concerts I haven't done with him, because he wanted to do it in Boston, he wanted to do it in Chicago, in San Francisco, in Tokyo, and so on and so on. So I booked all these orchestras, and they were all very happy. Unfortunately, I got a very strange answer now from the orchestra in Boston that the maestro will not conduct the piece. And he doesn't think that the piece is good, so he will not conduct the piece. Well, it's very sad, especially that someone is blocking a date for 2 years and then eventually is resigning from conducting it.
Presumably you mean the principal conductor there, James Levine. You can only mean James Levine at that orchestra. But you do have, though, a strong relationship with new music, and with also composers, Ligeti, Boulez, Henri Dutilleux, people who you know and whose music you play. Again, whose music you don't play in public, but the music you clearly know very well.
I adore them as personalities also. I visited them with my students, and I think how much was changed in the 20th century just by these two personalities of Boulez and Dutilleux. It's amazing. It's amazing.
So you know all their piano music, but
yes.
But then it's pieces that you won't play in public, don't play in public, choose not to.
Well, it's too difficult for me, but I'm working on it.
It would be good if you did, I think.
Yes, it would be good, yes, if I could only manage, it's, you know.
But you keep up with new music and contemporary composition. It's important to you that the piano has a new repertoire that is continually evolving.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of pianists don't play that repertoire at all. And there's, you know, if you look at recital programs, you would say that there isn't a new repertoire for it.
We're talking about two things, playing, analyzing, working on it, and selling it. I don't sell it, let's put it this way. But I have all the scores at home, and it's so many, inspiring, really inspiring pieces.
What about your own teaching, the handful of people who I think you still work with at some level?
They keep coming back for some reason. There's no one day past that I don't get a phone call from one of my former students, which is very nice.
The sort of things that you're teaching them and involving them with that go far beyond the idea of, this is how you play this passage. There are many things to do with psychology, what a performer is. Where do those things come from in your own life? In other words, was that a teaching that you had from your own influences, inspirations in your early life?
Yes, but some of this I developed also myself. And some of this came of a necessity. I remember that I was asked the question, I have an interview with a student before, and the interview is not so much to discover whether the student is good, but to discover whether I'm a good teacher for the student. And I asked one student, why do you want to work with me? And he said, I listened to your last concert and I would like to play also a concert without wrong notes. I said, oh my God, this is horrible. This is just terrible. And we started to work, and he was waiting all the year. He said, when do we start to work on technique? I said, what technique? I mean, you have fingers, you put them on a keyboard and you make a sound, and there is no technique. And then 4 years later, he played his diploma, and I made a joke. I came backstage, and I said, did you realize you didn't play wrong notes? And he said, if you would have told me this 4 years ago, I wouldn't believe you, that actually achieving this, you achieve through giving meaning to every note. I mean, you're concentrated on the music flow, but you don't think, for goodness sake, about these notes or about technique in a concert hall. This is completely not important.
So how do you get to that relationship with the flow of music, with what the meaning of music is? Does that suggest that you have one idea about what this music is, that once you have the
no
interpretation...
empty passage, let's put it this way. There's no one note which you just play subconsciously. It's like a word. When it's missing in a phrase, the whole phrase doesn't make any sense. And that's what's basically necessary to do in a process of learning a piece, just giving a meaning of every sign which the composer made.
Where did you learn that from? I mean, were the pianists...
Probably from my teacher.
Who was?
Mr. Jashinsky. But I started so early with him that a lot of things I don't remember when I was 7. But it was an exciting time, and a person teaching from the right attitude for teaching, which is so rarely the case in this profession, as also in all the other professions. People do so many things for the wrong attitude.
Who were you inspired by most of when you were growing up as a pianist?
Oh, a lot of old masters and also contemporary pianists. I still learn today from people who are younger than me. And at this time, of course, all the great masters like Rubinstein, like Kempf, like Arau, like Gilels, Richter, and so on. And with most of them, I had a kind of friendship relationship. I mean, I was working with Arau for several years. I knew Michelangelo I met him several times. I knew Richter quite well. We were corresponding for many years. Also Gilels. I was for 7 years very close to Arthur Rubinstein, and I learned a lot of things from him. And it's amazing when you're so much younger, because I was 71 years younger than Rubinstein. So this relationship was kind of funny, because he was saying things and I pretended that I understand them, however, memorizing them. And now when I look for solving a problem and I start to find solutions and I start to verbalize the solutions, because that also started from the moment I started to teach, the necessity of verbalizing it, I suddenly end up with a phrase which I heard from Arthur. I said, okay, so I'm on the right way.
You're a very different pianist from a lot of those people, though, in the sense of your relationship with performing and how little you perform.
That scares me.
But in terms of, the way Rubinstein, for example, would
Yeah, it was a
given
different
of
time. It was a
performances
different
and-
time.
yeah.
Yeah, it was a different time. You know, it was very funny. I remember talking with him about Brahms recital. He opposed at first that I play a Brahms recital in Paris. He said, that will never work. And then he came to the recital and said, you know, that was a great experience, actually. I was looking at the French and listening to a pure Brahms program, which probably 50 years ago wouldn't work. And then he said, I also played this sonata in South America. I got the music in the morning and I looked at it in my room, hotel room, and when I played it in the evening, I said, wait a second, how could you play this in one day? I mean, I said, you know, we played different at this time. We sort of began the piece and then played the theme from a second movement and then improvised around the third movement. I said, oh my God, it must have been absolutely incredible because there was no phonography yet. The people in a concert hall didn't know the pieces. They didn't have the scores, they didn't have the records, so the pianist could do anything. And yet he could do that, what was the most important in this piece, transmitting, you know, the most important meaning the sonata had.
The other pianist you're very different from in one regard is Sviatoslav Richter, because Richter, I think, said that he'd happily, he said, I think he almost said it was a duty that a pianist ought to be able to play on any piano. That ought to be, you know, a definition of how you perform.
I didn't
it's completely
like this
different.
part. The same said Arau, and then I noticed that in every concert hall there's this big truck of a piano carried to Arau's concert, and it was written Arau on it, the same Richter. And there was always a Yamaha, the same Yamaha carried to his concert. So it's actually unfair if you say this and then you do a different thing.
But you do have, I mean, can you just maybe describe the mechanics of how you transport your piano around?
Well,
I think
you know,
designed your own
you can do it
position.
on any piano. You can do it standing on your head. You can do it with your feet if you really want to impress the people. The question is why? You know, the violinist is carrying his own violin, and he wouldn't dream of taking someone else's fiddle and play. Is it only because the piano is heavy? How heavy does it have to be so that you don't carry it around? I found ways how to do it, and it doesn't solve the problem, though, because the piano gets very quickly out of tune. You have to control it quite a lot. There's a lot of trouble. I tell you, I'm doing this exclusively since 1989. So it's now 19 years.
Transporting your piano,
transporting
your
my
own
own
piano around the
piano
world.
to the concert halls.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably could build 2 houses from the money I spend on piano transports. It doesn't become easier because after 2001, it became more and more difficult, and 2 of my pianos got destroyed in America. So it's now extremely difficult to do this, but fortunately the problem is solved because next year I play my last concert in America, and then there is a longer break.
Okay, what do you mean you play your last concert in America?
You know, for the last 8 years I was observing this country, and my attitude today, you know, I have to have a positive attitude to the people I play for, and it got really, quite a lot of this got destroyed in the last 8 years. I cannot agree with many things which happened in the political life of this country, and I thought of giving it a few years just to wait and see what will happen in the future.
So in other words, basically saying you don't want to play in America because you can't have a kind of honest relationship with them as an audience? Or with
you
the
know, I really
audiences?
wouldn't like to talk about it because I don't want to spread negative thoughts here in this interview. Well, it is our duty. You know, when I turned 50 and I was complaining about this and that, and my daughter said, so what did you do to change the world? And I realized I haven't done enough. So I went on stage and I was talking to the audience and I was trying to make them aware of what is happening.
Where was it? In America?
It was in America. And it's a long story. It's not for this interview. It's not for...
No, but briefly perhaps, the idea is that you spoke to them to make them aware of...
I try to make them aware that weapons is not a way of solving problems. That weapons mean the end of a politician. That wars are created by cowards, not by brave people.
But in these situations, if you decide that you can't play in America anymore, partly for those reasons, what can you do as a musician? I mean, how can you answer your daughter's question? What did you do to change the world?
Well, I did a speech after every concert in my last 2 American tours, and as a result, I have quite a lot of trouble now in organizing my tours. And so I dropped out of 2 tours now. I had to cancel them all together. And I'll just wait until the situation changes, and then we'll come back. Maybe with a new government, people will realize that arming criminals is not a way of leading the world.
Aside, in a way, from that specific political question, what is your function in society as a musician? You know, what are you doing as
I don't know what is my
pianist
function, but I have certainly a possibility to address 2,000-3,000 people, not only with my music, but also with my thoughts. And I was trying to use this opportunity.
But do you think also that, outside of talking, that the music itself, that the stories, the flow of the pieces you play can...
That probably has nothing to do with the music now. It has to do with the opportunity of meeting these people.
Do you also have a problem then with the way that classical music, perhaps increasingly, is regarded as an entertainment rather than a necessity?
Can you go deeper into the question?
What I mean by that is that the people coming to a concert at the festival hall or in Basingstoke or wherever else you're playing in Britain, or wherever you play on the continent, are coming to hear you play music, often that they probably know, at least they think they know. They may hear different things in your interpretation, but in other words, that they're coming because they want to be entertained, that they're coming to escape from the world rather than be confronted with something
I don't
about themselves.
think why they're coming. And because I'm not giving these programs too early, they don't come to listen to the Moonlight Sonata.
No, okay, they come to listen to you.
But with the time, I have to say, I see the same faces in the concert hall. I started with 300 people in Concertgebouw in Amsterdam, and because I didn't do any publicity, I didn't do any television, radio, or interviews, in the next concert hall there were 600 people. And the same 300 came back. And until I sold out Concertgebouw, something like 7 years passed. But this audience, selected in such a way and won in such a way, is incredible. It's the best audience. I wouldn't change my audience with any other artist in the world.
I mean, what do you think those people are getting from your concerts?
I don't know. Whatever they're getting, I'm the one to give. And they can decide what they want to take. It's not for me to decide what they're getting.
Okay. You had such close relationships with some of the greats of the earlier 20th century, or the latter half of the 20th century, Rubinstein, Rao, Richter, Gilels. I mean, do you think of your own place in that kind of pantheon of pianists?
I never thought about it. It's so difficult to place oneself, because you're playing from inside, and you know how many mistakes you do every second. So it's extremely difficult. And I have to tell you honestly, I don't have the inner necessity of placing myself anywhere. I'm trying to survive the next concert. This is more important.
Thank you for listening to this download from BBC Radio 3. For more information about the items you've been listening to, or to subscribe to the podcast, visit us online at bbc.co.uk/podcasts. Casts.